want to get into another episode of the Regenerage show, the premier show for everything along the topics of human health, aging, regeneration, repair, and rejuvenation. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Uh, Tonight's episode is entitled Whole Organism Rejuvenation and Combinatorial Biologics. So, on the last show, we introduced the audience to the theme of biological form control, which represents the true higher level master control systems of the human aging process. We talked about the various hierarchies and bidirectional interactions and feedback mechanisms throughout each respective level of your body, from your DNA to your cells to your tissues, organs, limbs, body segments, and how nothing in the area of biological aging can ever be looked at, for that matter manipulated, in a vacuum. And we had some fun throwing out that ridiculous analogy of thinking of your body as a classic automobile that can be maintained as such. Complete nonsense, which will move the anti-aging dynamic nowhere if we follow it. Each level of biology that holds your 30 trillion cells together throughout a lifetime and keeps you alive is intricately subordinate and integrated with one another. As examples, we talked about things like proper protein function and folding, not just dictated by the respective gene sequence or amino acid structures, but in the context of the whole metabolic architecture of the cell. We talked about tissue structure, which is not just dictated by specific cell lineages, but in the context of the novel biodynamics found within the intercellular spaces, such as membrane potentials, forces of mechanotransduction, interstitial viscoelasticity, and so forth. We also talked about how the reductionist view of targeting and approaching biological interventions developed purely by focusing on individual components of a system, as the modern pharma industry has done very successfully the last 100 years in giving us a wide range of treatments for conditions, unfortunately is going to fail when it comes to the complex dynamics such as controlling and reversing aging, where the properties and characteristics of the component parts and the reciprocal interplay of all the components must be taken into account. We mentioned that there was some good news, though, in that we humans happen to share a planet with many organisms that evolution has made very good at turning back biological time to do things like regenerate organs and limbs, to revert disease processes like cancer, and in certain cases to undertake whole organism rejuvenation, making themselves biologically younger. Lastly, we mentioned how the study of the last 100 years of regenerative biology have pointed to the facts that these amazing creatures possess two inherent capabilities that they use in balanced synergy. One of these is the ability to reestablish the embryogenic potential of their cells. And secondly, the ability to reestablish the morphodynamic architecture of their tissues, organs, limbs, and body segments. The ability to tap into and mimic both of these unique combinatorial capabilities with novel bioproducts in human beings will offer potential solutions to a wide range of disorders responsible for human degeneration, suffering, and death, and will more rapidly help usher in an era of radical health span and lifespan extension. But we're really going to have to think much differently as we segue into developing interventions that can recapitulate some of these dynamics, because where we are now are far beyond the pharma industry's single magic bullet approach. And this single magic bullet thinking, has yielded, widely acknowledged but largely unspoken truths that all of the disease output, read that as symptoms, targeted drugs that eventually make it to market are only going to work in a small percent of patients due to our emerging understanding of both patient and disease heterogeneity, and none will ever be capable of effecting an actual cure. Your blood pressure drug is never going to cure you of your high blood pressure. Your insulin is never going to cure you of your diabetes. Disease reversion, or age reversion for that matter, is a much taller order that has to take into account all of the hierarchies spoken of above and on our previous episodes. Let's talk about this now with an example from a set of technologies that's gotten quite exciting in recent years in the stem cell space. And that's the topic of cellular reprogramming. These cellular reprogramming tools, which are being developed by dozens of labs around the world nowadays, are in vitro tools for, in essence, cleaning up a cell, making epigenetic modifications, remodeling organelles, relongating telomeres, and so forth, all with the goal of stripping away a cell age and identity and retasking that cell for other purposes, for use in, say, regenerative medicine, an example being a stem cell transplant. These tools are, just some background, they're all variants from an original 1952 experiment on cloning by Dr. Robert Bridge and Thomas King, and since then have been modified by amazing thought leaders like Nobel Prize winner John Gurdon and Shinya Amanaka, Rudolf Janisch, and many others, into the current day, and they're all pretty good tools from one angle or another in making a cell younger and rejuvenated. However, making a cell younger is unfortunately not the same thing as making a whole organism younger, or your body segments, limbs, and organs for that matter. What we'll refer to as whole organism rejuvenation via reprogramming, which is a little more complicated. There is a chasm of difference between cellular reprogramming and whole organism reprogramming. And once again, this goes back to the hierarchy of where that cell sits in its respective tissue and the orders it takes from further up the chain. And this is true beyond aging in regards to more traditional therapeutic interests, and why, for instance, the scientific community has been working for decades on spinal cord injury stem cell transplants with very minimal effect, but why any little snoot or salamander, when you completely sever its spinal cord, are up and walking around in a few days. And they can do that throughout a lifetime. We humans are rooted into wheelchairs. Let's restate it again so we really think about this. Organisms, such as those amphibians or planarians or echinogerms or hydrozoans, possess not just the capability to reestablish embryogenic potential of their cells, but also to use that new cellular flexibility in real time to reestablish the morphodynamic architecture of their bodies. This later step involves many other things beyond just cell reprogramming. It requires things like extracellular matrix histolysis and remodeling, activation of certain components of the innate immune response, suppression of other parts of the adaptive immune response, alterations to membrane potentials, modifying biodynamic networks and gradients for appropriate morphogenetic flow of tissues, and a long list of other things that I just won't get into for now. The point is, you can't just expect, as in this case, to throw these young, new, reprogrammed cells into an older, damaged, aged body, and voila, expect to get a younger, rejuvenated organism out of it. The cross-transplantation experiments of the 1940s told us this decades ago. It's not the way biology works. New interventions moving forward are going to have to be broader. They're going to have to be more in tune with the hierarchy of your body's control systems, more combinatorial in nature. So what are combinatorial biologics? Essentially, they are biotherapeutic interventions which are capable of doing more than one thing, and whose physiochemical characteristics necessitate that in order to do more than one thing, they're going to have to be composed of defined combinations of bioactive substances or moieties. The good news is the regulatory agencies like the US FDA, the EU's EMEA, and Japan's PMDA have all in recent years come out with combination drug development guidance under a defined regulatory umbrella and pathway. And I suggest anyone who is interested in this area to go online, Google these respective regulations. Other guidance along these lines that can be found online, say at the FDA, have to do with their heterogenic botanical drug regs and their new living therapeutic guidances, where all of these types of products are extremely complex, and now there's flexibility to keep them as such. In the past, this was never a possibility, unless you as a pharmaceutical company developed individual components of drug combination first and then developed the combination afterwards, requiring cost-prohibitive drug development. And fortunately, the issue of combination therapy protocols has become much more prominent in recent years with HIV cocktails, multi-drug resistant chemotherapy protocols, where the simple one drug, one target solutions are proving inefficient and insufficient. It's not the way nature works ever. Nature utilizes random combinatorial approaches to their control of disease and degeneration, as evolutionary dynamics would never allow trees and amphibians and fish and all the other species that we share this planet with to adapt a single magic bullet approach. All species would die out. Lower organisms understand this and have adjusted evolutionarily accordingly. Humans and our pharmaceutical industry have yet to learn it, but we're trying to teach them. In short, it's our contention that there will be no single magic bullet for success in the area of longevity biotech, and any traditional single drug approach will be fairly futile, at best providing negligible benefits to humans. So on the next show, we're going to continue further along these themes. Now, moving on to the non-mandatory homework part of the show. As a follow-up to last show's recommendation, I have not a paper for you, but a book this time, which follows up on the general theme from the Stokely paper that I recommended on the last show. And it's Principles of Regenerative Biology, edited by Bruce Carlsen. This is I believe the 13th edition. You can find a variety of these editions online, probably in use format, very cost effective. And once again, it goes into a lot of what has happened over the last century in the field of regenerative biology. And I can't, hammer the point back more and more that there's so much that we have forgotten as a scientific community that we unfortunately are spending our time relearning, when it's great to go to resources like this one, which I term the Bible of regenerative biology, to really bring forth that historical data, whether it's from the 40s and the cross-transplantation era, or from the 70s and the cloning era, to really understand what we already know so we don't reinvent the wheel over and over again in trying to solve this problem known as aging. So once again, thank you very much for joining me again. Once again, I'm Ira Pastor, your host on the Regenerage show. If you like what you hear on the show, please subscribe to this channel, follow us on all social networks, LinkedIn, Instagram, and other social media. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today, and best in life and health. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.